One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. Undoubtedly, in our industry, schools are looking at their peers and what they're doing in many different facets, social and digital media obviously being one of them. Point blank, how often do your friends in Columbia come up as a topic of conversation on how they're telling their story?
I don't know that is all that common. Well, we obviously keep an eye on our competition across the conference, across the state, and everywhere, just like any good organization does. And we'll see good examples from various places our coaches will bring to us, or our student athletes will see from other schools that recruited them. And so we're constantly aware, but I don't know that it's a specifically targeted individual got to keep up with so-and-so.
Yeah, this is on this question, and also the previous one, is like it's a dangerous thing to try to keep up with what everybody else is doing, because to Joe's point, you end up getting out of what you do well because you're trying to do what other people do well. And so, for instance, there was an article last week in the Greenville News that talked about our operation, and it was specific to social media, but it had one nugget in there of many of that we've invested $250,000 in social media. Well, that's not true. We've invested money in terms of people and resources for overall communications, and that includes recruiting, that includes marketing, that includes traditional sports information, that includes the production of, or the construction of some of our facilities. Like, what our communications team does is not specific to social media. It's overall, big in marketing for the entire athletic department. And so if anybody can learn from what Clemson has done, it's to me, the biggest thing is understanding what Dan, Tim, and Joe did in terms of restructuring the existing sports information department as opposed to building out a small digital team. Because I think the reason why we've been able to be successful in a lot of areas is because the focus on digital permeated from the top down. It wasn't like, hey, these two people are the social media team and that's it. For 500 student athletes and 19 teams, like, that's impossible to keep up with that. So what Dan and Tim and Joe did was making it so that the entire department, everyone thinks digital first in terms of how we market and how we recruit. And that, I think, is what's allowed us to have a much, much higher ceiling. Maybe we could have had small wins sooner. I'm sure we could have had small wins sooner. But we have a higher ceiling. We have more capabilities now 3 years later because they built it out for the long term.
I want to pin you guys down on a couple of goals that you have, maybe for football season or for the next 12 months. And if we were to talk on May 16th, 2017, in terms of where you've moved the department, what specifically are you tracking on as you move forward?
So in terms of what's next, that's not a question that we ask ourselves at the end of the year. It's a question that we ask ourselves every day. And I like to joke around. I don't know if they did it on purpose or not. We can find out from the source right now. But they didn't, when they opened this position that I'm in now, it wasn't director of social media. It was director of new media. And the idea was, the way I took that is that, it's social media today, and that means Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. But next year, it's almost a certainty that will be different. And certainly 3, 5, 10 years from now, we'll be talking about this in a completely different way. So the concept is that we're always, the core principles of what we do, we're always going to need to connect with our target audiences, and we're always going to need to tell the stories of our individuals. And so how you do that, the platforms that you use, the technology you use is always going to change, but that never, the core principle never changes. So what's next is something that we try to figure out every day and not necessarily waiting for a season to roll around. But that's how our approach is, that if you see technology changing and if you see opportunities being presented by that development, then you can pretty much count on that Clemson's going to be moving in that direction. So we go as technology and as our target audiences go, whatever's going to be the best way to reach them is what we're going to be focusing on.
Is there a time coming where we will see, quote unquote, communication staffs be more dedicated for digital and social media on a programmatic basis? So for individual sports, so football has a staff of, 4 to 6. I mean, I think we've seen this a little bit in football already, but look across the board. Can you see a day where each sport program and maybe the revenue ones specifically have a more robust, dedicated social digital media team than simply somebody who is assigned department-wide?
There is a little bit of that throughout, I think, college athletics. And here at Clemson, we have, a pretty strong digital recruiting office in our football department. But I think structurally, for it to work best for our situation, is to have a centralized communications team that knows what's happening across various different sports so that we're not stepping all over each other. And we're speaking with a consistent Clemson voice in support of each of these different programs. Jonathan made mention earlier, and it's a term that we've used before, to look at ourselves as an agency that has almost account reps, spokes from our office that go out to each sport and bring knowledge and information specific to the sport back to our creative group that can then turn out content that is relevant to each sport. And I think that centralized model for us is probably going to be the way that we continue to move because it makes the most amount of sense.
Yeah, I think athletic departments our programs will only start hiring their own individual communications people if they feel like they're not getting what they need from the central communications office. And so that, again, is why what Dan and Tim and Joe did was, in my opinion, the right long-term move is that there are these resources within every athletic department in terms of a sports information or a communications office. And there's this giant opportunity in terms of digital marketing and content creation that every place could have. And the shift just needs to happen in terms of their everyday focus of what their jobs are. Because if they do that, and if, to Joe's point, if they're spending the time building the relationships with the coaches and the student athletes, then there's never a need for a program to go out and hire their own person because they're getting that in spades already. And the great part is they also have that larger group of specialty people that they can go back to because they're part of a larger office, as opposed to one person in a program is one person. And maybe they're a great graphic designer, maybe they're not. Maybe they're a great videographer, maybe they're not. Maybe they're a great writer, maybe they're not. But if they're part of a communications team, then they have all those resources available to them, and it's not solely dependent on them getting all of that done themselves. So in my eyes, the better long-term way to build it out is to look at the staff that you have and see if you can refocus their day-to-day responsibilities to address the needs of not just the department, but the programs.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.